Imagine standing on the edge of a quiet, high desert valley in Utah. You're looking out over the scrub brush, and suddenly, just out of nowhere, nearly 100 football fields of dense forest just explode into flames.
Right, just a massive wall of fire.
Exactly. And they burn completely to ash in an hour. And this is the crazy part, the very next hour, they instantly reignite and burn down again, over and over.
Yeah, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, forever.
Forever. And that staggering display of thermal energy is the exact thermodynamic equivalent of what is about to be built in Box Elder County.
Well, it sounds apocalyptic when you frame it like that, honestly. But from a purely mathematical standpoint, if you're looking at the physics of energy dissipation, that is exactly what rejecting 22,500 megawatts of continuous waste heat looks like.
It's just an unfathomable amount of energy being blasted right into the
It
atmosphere.
really is.
So, welcome to our deep dive into the source material. We are taking a massive stack of documents today. I mean, we've got a comprehensive 14-page environmental, economic, and architectural analysis report alongside numerous public statements, financial projections, local government documents.
There's a lot of reading for this one.
So much reading. But we are plunging straight into the heart of the Stratos project. You might have actually seen the headlines referring to it as the Wonder Valley campus.
Yeah, and we are focusing on this specific project because you, the listener, have undoubtedly heard the rumblings. I mean, the news has been totally saturated with stories of massive rural backlash against these mega data centers.
Oh, the tension on the ground is palpable. So our mission today is to rigorously examine those narratives. We want to figure out if the local fears of, community destruction in Utah are actually justified.
Right, and we're going to look at how cutting-edge technology is achieving surprisingly near-zero impact on certain local resources.
Which is fascinating in itself.
Exactly. And we'll weigh that against the monumental economic and geopolitical upside that's being touted for both the locals and the United States as a whole.
It is a really delicate balance. We are parsing through highly technical engineering specs on one side and then deeply human sociopolitical realities on the other.
Okay, let's unpack this because we really need to set the baseline for you right now.
Yeah, definitely. If your brain is picturing like a large windowless warehouse building with some server racks humming away, like a standard server farm, you need to erase that image entirely.
Completely erase it. The scale here it's very difficult to conceptualize.
We are talking about a designated 40,000-acre project area, a total capitalization approaching $100 billion.
Billion, with a B.
With a B, yeah. And the electrical requirement, 9 gigawatts of power.
Which is just a massive number. To put that in perspective for you, 9 gigawatts is more than double the current electricity consumption of the entire state of Utah.
Or double?
Double. Everything. Every house, hospital, factory in Utah combined, multiplied by 2. That's what this one facility needs.
That is just wild. What's fascinating here is that to understand the Stratos project, you have to immediately discard the concept of commercial real estate.
Right. You cannot look at this the way you look at an office park or like an Amazon distribution center. It's an unprecedented industrial megastructure.
It fundamentally tests the absolute limits of modern engineering, the limits of global supply chains, and at the exact same time, it's testing the structural integrity of local governance.
$100 billion. I mean, that is the kind of money a government spends to initiate a Mars colony or to build an entire national highway system from scratch.
Yeah, and a private consortium is deploying this in the high desert. So the big question is why? How does a patch of dry dirt in northern Utah connect to the global stage in a way that warrants that level of capital?
Well, the connection stems from a fundamental shift in the architecture of the internet and, more importantly, the architecture of computation itself. Because over the past 3 years, the tech sector has decisively pivoted away from traditional cloud computing.
You mean the era where you just needed a basic server to host a company website or store your vacation photos?
Exactly. That kind of computing is relatively lightweight. It asks a processor to do one thing at a time, sequentially.
Right. Traditional cloud computing was about storage and basic logic. But the modern era is entirely defined by artificial intelligence workloads.
Specifically, the training and deployment of massive multimodal generative AI models.
And the hardware required for that is just, it's a completely different beast.
Oh, yeah. The transition from central processing units (CPUs) to specialized graphic processing units (GPUs) is the primary driver here.
Because an AI model doesn't process information in a straight line, right?
Right, it processes billions of parameters simultaneously to find patterns. So to do that, it requires tens of thousands of GPUs operating in parallel.
I always try to visualize it like this. Tell me if this makes sense. A traditional CPU is like a single brilliant mathematics professor solving a complex equation on a chalkboard.
Okay.
It might take an hour, but they'll get it done. A GPU cluster, on the other hand, is like putting 50,000 high school math students in a massive stadium and having them all solve one tiny piece of the equation at the exact same millisecond.
That's a great way to picture it.
The stadium gets the answer instantly, but keeping 50,000 students fed, hydrated, and coordinated requires an astronomical amount of energy compared to just the one professor.
That is an incredibly accurate way to model the electrical load density. When those 50,000 GPUs all draw power simultaneously to process a query, the electrical demand spikes to levels that traditional public utility grids simply were not built to support.
Yeah, they were built for the single professor's desk lamp, not the entire stadium.
Exactly. Which brings us to the geopolitical layer of this project. The developers, led by O'Leary Digital in a strategic joint venture with WestGenco LLC, they are not pitching this to local governments as a commercial endeavor to sell software subscriptions.
They aren't saying, like, let us build this so we can make better chatbots.
No, they are explicitly framing this massive campus as a critical national security imperative.
Kevin O'Leary, the Canadian billionaire investor leading O'Leary Digital, he's taken a very aggressive public stance on this. He has explicitly linked the necessity of the Utah facility to the broader geopolitical rivalry between the United States and China.
He's totally pitching it as an arms race.
He is. According to the strategic documents and his public statements, O'Leary claims that China has added approximately 400 gigawatts of new power capacity over the past 24 months alone.
400 gigawatts.
And a significant portion of that massive state-sponsored influx of power is being dedicated strictly to powering sovereign AI data centers.
400 gigawatts in 2 years. I mean, if Utah uses 4 gigawatts total, China just built 100 Utah's worth of power generation in 24 months.
Yeah, it's staggering. And the argument O'Leary is making is that whichever nation controls the largest and most efficient compute capacity is going to dictate the future of global artificial intelligence.
And if you control AI, you dictate global cyber defense. You dictate rapid materials science discovery. You basically own the next century of economic innovation.
It is entirely reframed from commercial tech to sovereign infrastructure. Like, instead of stockpiling uranium and building nuclear silos, nations are stockpiling high-end silicon and building these hyperscale data megacampuses.
The compute power itself is the deterrent now.
But I have to push back slightly here.
Go for it.
I hear the geopolitical argument, and yes, it sounds incredibly compelling. But is this national security rhetoric just a highly convenient, impenetrable shield for a private developer?
That's the big question.
Because if I'm a billionaire and I want to bypass local complaints about my massive, loud, disruptive corporate project, what better way to silence local critics than by wrapping my business plan in the American flag and declaring it a matter of national security? It just feels like the ultimate trump card against a local planning commission.
And the source material heavily wrestles with that exact tension. Whether you view this framing as genuine patriotism in the face of a rising global threat, or, as a masterful piece of corporate spin designed to fast-track zoning, the objective reality is that the geopolitical framing worked flawlessly.
It worked.
It is exactly what successfully unlocked state-level support in Utah.
Utah Governor Spencer Cox has publicly echoed this exact sentiment, hasn't he?
He has. He characterized the rapid expansion of machine learning infrastructure as essential to national defense.
And when the governor buys into the thesis that your data center is essentially a digital aircraft carrier, well, the bureaucratic red tape starts to magically disappear.
Exactly. And the financial architecture of the project also reflects this sovereign-level scale. The experts and developers are structuring the capitalization as if they're building a massive piece of public utility infrastructure.
$100 billion at full build-out is not typical corporate finance.
Not at all. Phase 1 alone, which targets an initial 3 gigawatts of generation, is projected to require more than $4 billion in direct upfront investment.
And total early phase expenditures are expected to exceed $20 billion before the facility is even fully operational. You don't just secure a small business loan for that.
Right. To secure that kind of capital, the sources note that O'Leary Digital had to retain a consortium of blue-chip global investment banks just to structure the project-level equity and debt financing.
They brought in KPMG or...
Yeah, to provide ongoing financial and tax advisory services. They are treating this project with the exact same financial gravity as a nuclear power station or a massive multinational hydroelectric dam.
Okay, so let's synthesize this. The United States, in this geopolitical framing, desperately needs this compute power to maintain global supremacy against China.
Right.
The developers have the billions of dollars lined up from Wall Street. But we just established a massive physical constraint earlier in the year. The public utility grid in Utah cannot handle a sudden 9-gigawatt load.
Definitely not.
You cannot just plug a $90 billion AI campus into the local wall socket without blacking out the entire western United States. So how are they actually powering this thing?
This is where we encounter the first major technological mitigation of the project. To solve the power crisis, the developers engineered a concept they call the shadow grid.
A shadow grid. I mean, it sounds like something from a dystopian sci-fi novel.
The name is definitely dramatic, but its real-world implementation is arguably the single most important engineering feat of the Stratos project.
How does it work compared to the normal setup?
Well, to understand its value, we have to look at the traditional model. Normally, a data center acts like a very large residential home. It connects to the public utility grid, it purchases electricity from the local provider, and it pulls from the exact same pool of electrons that powers your refrigerator and the local hospital.
But the U.S. electrical grid is currently facing a profound systemic capacity crisis.
A massive one.
We have multi-year interconnection queues just to get permission to draw power. The transmission lines are aging, and they simply cannot carry the amperage required.
If O'Leary Digital waited for the public grid to be upgraded enough to support an extra 9 gigawatts, they would be waiting in a regulatory queue for a decade. By the time they got the power, the so-called AI race would be over.
So what's their workaround?
To circumvent the public grid entirely, the Stratos facility is designed to operate as a self-sustaining energy island.
Meaning they pull 0 electrons from the Utah public grid.
0. The master plan relies on a direct, high-capacity physical connection to the Ruby pipeline.
The Ruby pipeline, that's a massive 680-mile interstate natural gas corridor, right?
Exactly. It stretches from Wyoming all the way to Oregon, and it conveniently passes directly through northern Utah, right near the project site.
I want to make sure I'm fully wrapping my head around the community impact of this. It's like, okay, it's like showing up to a crowded RV park on a holiday weekend. Every single spot is taken. The power poles are ancient, and if you plug in your massive state-of-the-art luxury RV, you are going to blow the fuses for the entire park.
Oh, absolutely.
So instead of plugging into the local pole and making every single resident hate you, you brought your own hyper-efficient industrial generator. You just run a hose directly to the fuel truck and make your own electricity, leaving the RV park's grid completely untouched.
That analogy maps perfectly to the shadow grid. By tapping directly into that interstate natural gas pipeline, the Stratos facility will burn natural gas on-site to independently generate its entire 9-gigawatt electrical load.
And from a local community standpoint, that is a massive relief. Because when we talk about whether the community's fears are justified, one of the biggest fears when a tech giant moves into a rural town is that they will suck up all the local power.
Residents worry about brownouts, or that their own residential electricity rates will spike because this massive corporation is suddenly competing with them for a limited supply of power.
The shadow grid architecture completely shields the Utah residents from that specific threat. Because the data center is isolated from the public utility grid, it places absolutely no upward pressure on the electricity rates of residential consumers.
It fundamentally engineers away the threat to local power stability.
But building a 9-gigawatt shadow grid is not as simple as buying a generator at a hardware store. You need industrial-scale equipment. And the sources detail an incredibly severe bottleneck in the global supply chain for this exact heavy machinery.
Yeah, the bottleneck is real. To generate this much power efficiently, the project relies on dozens of advanced high-efficiency gas turbines. Specifically, the engineering documents mandate a combination of heavy-duty combined cycle systems and highly responsive aeroderivative turbines.
I know aeroderivative turbines are essentially modified jet engines strapped to the ground.
Pretty much, yeah.
But let's break down the combined cycle tech. Why is a combined cycle system so vital here? Why is it fundamentally better than just burning gas in a standard power plant?
It is entirely about capturing thermodynamic waste and turning it into secondary value. In a standard, simple cycle natural gas plant, you burn the gas, the expanding combustion gases spin a turbine to generate electricity, and then the massive amount of exhaust heat, which is often over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, just goes straight up a smokestack and dissipates into the atmosphere.
So you're just throwing massive amounts of kinetic energy away.
Precisely. But a combined cycle system catches that exhaust. The waste heat generated by that primary natural gas turbine is captured and funneled into a massive boiler system. The heat is used to boil water, which creates high-pressure steam.
And then that steam spins a completely separate secondary turbine.
Yes, it spins a secondary steam turbine, generating a significant amount of additional electricity without having to burn a single extra molecule of natural gas.
That is incredibly clever engineering.
It drastically increases the overall thermal efficiency of the power plant, jumping from roughly 40% efficiency in a simple cycle to over 60% in a combined cycle.
You are squeezing every possible drop of energy out of the fuel. But here is the massive logistical hurdle. Every single developer in the hyperscale data center boom has realized this is the only way forward. And it has created an absolute traffic jam in the global supply chain.
The bottleneck is severe, and it honestly threatens the entire timeline of the project. Major global manufacturers, companies like GE Vernova, Siemens Energy, and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, are currently struggling to meet the surging demand.
Just how bad is the wait list?
According to our forces, GE Vernova recently reported a staggering backlog of 83 gigawatts in contracted gas turbines.
83 gigawatts. Wait, we established earlier that the state of Utah uses 4.
Yes.
That is 20 entire states worth of power generation equipment just sitting on a waiting list.
And that backlog is driven almost entirely by the relentless expansion of U.S. artificial intelligence infrastructure. The demand is so intense that GE Vernova recently announced a $600 million investment just to expand its U.S. manufacturer facilities.
Right.
And Siemens Energy committed $1 billion to ramp up its domestic turbine and grid solution production capabilities.
$1 billion just to build the factories to eventually build the turbines. But you can't just snap your fingers and build these machines. They require highly specialized metallurgy, right? Like single crystal superalloys that can withstand extreme rotational forces and temperatures.
The manufacturing complexity is immense. Even with these massive capital injections into new factories, current lead times for these heavy-duty turbines remain near 5 years.
5 years. So O'Leary Digital can have all the billions they want sitting in a bank account.
Right.
But if they cannot physically acquire the turbines, they cannot build the shadow grid. The report literally highlights that securing early and reliable allocation of these critical power generation units will be the single largest logistical hurdle for the developers as they push for their Phase 1 target.
It is a high-stakes race against time and constrained supply chains. But let's operate under the assumption that they secure the turbines.
Okay, let's assume they get them.
Let's say the shadow grid functions perfectly, generating 9 gigawatts of power without touching the local public grid. The second you mention a combined cycle turbine, you mention boiling water. And the moment you mention 50,000 GPUs, you mention cooling.
Which introduces an entirely new, potentially catastrophic variable for a desert environment. This brings us to the single greatest, most visceral fear of the local community. It is the issue that sparks absolute terror in Box Elder County, the water war.
We really have to understand the specific geographical and ecological reality of Box Elder County to understand this fear.
Right, lay it out for us.
The project site sits immediately north of the Great Salt Lake. This is a fragile terminal basin ecosystem.
And a terminal basin means water flows into it, but there is no outlet to the ocean, right? Water only leaves through evaporation.
Exactly. And this basin has been suffering catastrophic historic declines.
The sources are incredibly grim on this point. The water level of the Great Salt Lake has plummeted 22 feet since 1986.
22 feet.
That massive drop is due to chronic, multi-decadal drought driven by climate change, combined with relentless upstream agricultural diversions.
And when a massive, highly saline lake dries up, it doesn't just leave behind a pleasant sandy beach. It exposes vast tracts of toxic lakebed dust.
Toxic dust.
Yeah, over decades, agricultural runoff and natural mineral deposits have concentrated heavy metals in the lakebed. If the lake desiccates further, seasonal windstorms will pick up that toxic dust, which contains high levels of naturally occurring arsenic and antimony, and blow it directly into the surrounding communities.
Arsenic in the air. I mean, it's a literal nightmare scenario for public health. You breathe that in, and you're looking at severe respiratory issues, increased cancer risks, and profound ecological damage. So when the local community hears that a $90 billion data center is moving into their arid valley, they immediately assume this monstrous industrial facility is going to siphon millions of gallons of fresh water from this already precarious watershed to cool its servers. They assume the data center is going to drain the lake dry and poison the air.
That is the widespread public perception. But this is where the deep dive into the engineering documents provides a fascinating counterpart. Reality of the Stratos project.
The developers aren't using traditional cooling. If you live in a drought state, hearing that a mega corporation is buying up water rights probably sets off alarm bells. You're probably assuming they're going to evaporate millions of gallons a day.
Naturally.
But the engineering docs actually show a bizarre, brilliant twist.
To understand the twist, look at legacy data centers. Traditional facilities rely heavily on evaporative cooling towers. In those systems, you take the hot water coming off the server rooms, you spray it over intricate baffles, and massive fans blow ambient air across the cascading water.
It's exactly like sweating. The water evaporates into the atmosphere, and as it turns from liquid to gas, it absorbs and carries away the heat.
But biological sweating requires continuous hydration. That traditional model results in the continuous consumption of millions of gallons of fresh water per day. The water just vanishes into the sky as vapor.
But the Wonder Valley campus fundamentally rejects that evaporative model.
The master design strictly mandates the use of an advanced closed-loop chilling system combined with dry, air-based cooling. The plans stipulate 0 evaporative cooling towers.
I'm trying to visualize this closed-loop system in a facility this size. If they aren't evaporating water to cool these thousands of GPUs, my instinct is to picture a giant car radiator.
A car radiator is a great comparison.
The fluid touches the hot engine block, gets pushed to a metal grate at the front of the car, and as you drive, ambient air blows through the fins, cooling the fluid down. The water never actually leaves the pipes, right? You aren't constantly pouring water into your radiator to keep the car running.
You're hitting on the exact physics, but scale that car radiator up to the size of a small city.
Okay.
In a closed-loop configuration, the cooling fluid, which is typically a highly treated mixture of purified water and anti-corrosive glycol, circulates entirely within a network of sealed, pressurized piping.
Got it.
This chilled fluid flows directly through the data halls. It absorbs the massive heat loads generated by the dense server racks using advanced direct-to-chip liquid cold plates, where the liquid actually passes over the silicon processors themselves.
So the fluid touches the heat source, gets incredibly hot, and then it gets pumped out to the radiator.
Exactly. Once heated, the fluid is pumped out of the data halls to external dry coolers arrayed on the facility's roof or along the perimeter. Thousands of massive, high-velocity industrial fans blow ambient desert air across heavily fenned coils containing the hot glycol fluid.
And it cools it down.
Yes, the thermal energy is rejected directly into the atmosphere via convection. The ambient air gets hotter, but the fluid inside the pipes cools down, and then that cooled fluid is continuously recirculated back into the data halls.
Because the entire system is hermetically sealed, the cooling fluid is never exposed to the outside environment, meaning evaporation is virtually eliminated.
Right. Water is only required for the massive initial one-time charging of the hundreds of miles of internal piping and for minor periodic maintenance to replace incidental microscopic leaks.
So once it's operational, the ongoing daily water demand of this 9-gigawatt hyperscale data center is going to be roughly equivalent to that of a standard commercial office complex. We're talking about flushing toilets in the employee restrooms, washing dishes in the cafeterias, and basic janitorial services.
And this wasn't just a benevolent, environmentally conscious choice by the developers. The Box Elder County officials viewed this technology as so absolutely critical to their survival that they made the utilization of a closed-loop system a strict, non-negotiable rule within the legally binding interlocal agreement.
The county lawyers locked it in.
They did.
But we have to address the initial fill. They still need water for that massive initial pipe charging and for those combined cycle steam turbines we talked about earlier. Where is that initial water coming from if they aren't draining the lake?
The county agreement strictly and explicitly prohibits the developers from drawing any water directly from the Great Salt Lake. Furthermore, they are mandated to use independent groundwater wells, keeping their industrial supply physically isolated from municipal drinking water systems.
So they are out there buying private water rights
Yep.
from locals.
Yes, they are acquiring water rights directly from private landowners who currently hold established agricultural water rights attached to their property in the Hansel Valley. For Phase 1, they plan to utilize approximately 3,500 acre-feet of water.
To visualize an acre-foot, it is exactly what it sounds like, the volume of water it takes to cover 1 acre of flatland in 1 foot of water. 3,500 acre-feet is a significant volume, but the sources point out a massive twist regarding the specific chemical quality of that groundwater.
Crucially, the groundwater in this specific region of the Hansel Valley is highly saline. It is completely degraded due to decades of geological mineral dissolution and agricultural runoff.
Meaning it's bad water.
It is far too salty for human consumption, and honestly, it is highly detrimental to high-yield agricultural crops.
So the farmers have basically been pumping salty, degraded water onto their fields for decades just to grow low-yield, salt-tolerant feed.
Basically.
But you cannot put salty water into $1 billion worth of delicate cooling pipes and high-pressure steam turbines. The salt and minerals would scale up and corrode the entire system from the inside out in a matter of weeks.
Exactly. To utilize this degraded water, the project is constructing an advanced on-site desalination and water treatment plant. This facility will use reverse osmosis and chemical filtration to strip the salts and heavy minerals from the groundwater, creating the ultra-pure water necessary for the closed-loop systems and standard domestic plumbing.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and this is the part that I found truly remarkable in the source analysis. Because of this closed-loop system, the data center will ultimately consume less water than the highly inefficient flood irrigation agricultural operations it is actively displacing.
It represents a net positive hydrological outcome for the local aquifer. State officials and the developer are projecting a net reduction in the overall draw on the fragile water table.
But the agreement goes one step further. The county legally stipulates that any excess clean water produced by the on-site desalination facility, water they pump and purify, but don't ultimately need for the facility, must be discharged and returned directly to the Great Salt Lake watershed.
They are essentially taking salty, degraded agricultural water, purifying it at their own massive expense for industrial use, and then sending the excess clean, pure water back into the struggling ecosystem.
That's wild.
It theoretically provides a highly localized benefit to a lake that desperately needs every clean drop it can get.
It is a masterclass in technological mitigation. They essentially engineered the water problem completely away, turning a terrifying community liability into a potential ecological asset.
They did. And this is a profound pivot point in our analysis in industrial engineering. There is no such thing as a free lunch.
Right.
You solve one physical problem, and the laws of physics dictate that you inevitably create another.
If they solve the water problem, they're still stuck with the heat. We mentioned those thousands of massive high-velocity industrial fans required for the dry air cooling. You drop thousands of giant industrial fans and a natural gas power plant in the middle of a quiet desert basin, and you suddenly introduce 2 new potential nightmares for the local community: deafening noise and massive visual blight.
Let's examine the sensory footprint of a 9-gigawatt fortress. The acoustic threats in a facility of this magnitude are formidable.
It's not just the spinning fan blades, right? There's a whole symphony of industrial noise.
Exactly. You have the massive air intakes and high-velocity exhaust stacks of the natural gas turbines. You have the continuous, deep, vibrating hum of high-voltage step-down electrical transformers. And then you have the synchronized whir of tens of thousands of industrial fans pushing air across the dry coolers.
In a flat, arid basin like Box Elder County, sound waves can propagate for miles without any natural obstruction, like dense forests or rolling hills to absorb them.
Yeah.
An unmitigated facility of this scale would produce a terrifying combination of sound.
It really would.
You'd have low-frequency infrasound, that deep, rhythmic vibration you feel in your chest, rather than hear with your ears, and high-pitched fan whine that would literally render the surrounding valley uninhabitable for residents. It would sound like living next to the tarmac at a major international airport.
Recognizing this existential threat to the quality of life, the Box Elder County Commission once again leveraged the interlocal agreement. They imposed strict, highly specific, legally binding acoustic guardrail provisions.
What are the limits?
O'Leary Digital is legally bound to ensure that noise levels at the external boundaries of both the power plant and the data center campuses absolutely do not exceed a maximum limit of 55 decibels.
Let's contextualize 55 decibels for you. 55 decibels is not a jet engine. It is roughly the ambient sound level of a modern running household dishwasher,
Hmm.
or if you step outside, it's the low background hum of a quiet residential neighborhood street.
Achieving a strict 55 decibel limit at the property line of a massive heavy industrial installation is not a simple regulatory checkmark. It requires extraordinary, highly expensive acoustic engineering.
You can't just put up a standard chain link fence and politely ask the servers and turbines to keep it down.
You have to manipulate the physics of sound. To meet this standard, the developers must design the facility using extreme mitigation tactics. The natural gas turbines will need to be enclosed within heavily insulated acoustic housings or dedicated concrete bunkers to trap the low-frequency rumble.
And the fans.
The dry cooler fan arrays will require specialized, highly engineered, low-noise fan blades.
The sources mention the use of serrated owl wing trailing edges on the fan blades. This is a fascinating application of biomimicry.
How does that work?
Owls are famously silent flyers because the trailing edges of their feathers feature tiny serrations that break up aerodynamic turbulence, preventing the swooshing sound typical of other birds. The engineers are literally copying the microscopic structure of owl wings to break up the air vortices coming off the fan blades, which fundamentally kills the high-frequency whine.
It is brilliant aerodynamic engineering. Furthermore, the master plan will likely incorporate the construction of massive earthen berms, dense engineered tree lines, or towering acoustic baffling walls around the entire perimeter of the chiller yards.
To block the sound physically.
Yes, these physical barriers are designed specifically to absorb and deflect those deep, low-frequency sound waves upward and away from neighboring properties.
So if you live a couple of miles away, you aren't going to be subjected to an industrial roar. But the sources do clarify that the sheer volume of continuous air movement means that if you are standing immediately at the project boundary line, it will be characterized by a permanent, low-level mechanical hum.
It will not be pristine desert silence, but it will be legally contained and forced by continuous monitoring to the volume of a dishwasher.
Okay, so they muffled the roar. But what about the visual threat? 40,000 acres of potential industrial sprawl. Are we looking at a hellscape of smoke, steel, and flashing lights dominating the pristine Utah horizon?
The aesthetic impact is a major concern for the local populace, and it is heavily addressed in the project's master planning, which is being led by Gensler.
Gensler is a massive name in architecture. They are one of the world's largest and most prestigious design firms.
They specialize in designing critical facilities that meet extreme engineering standards while actively attempting to minimize visual blight. Gensler's architectural philosophy for these hyperscale campuses involves utilizing the natural topography to camouflage the facility as much as possible.
The interior renderings in the source documents show these sleek, clinically clean, brightly lit environments. The typical sci-fi server halls you'd expect, but for the exterior, they are pulling inspiration from O'Leary's parallel Wonder Valley campus in Alberta, Canada.
Right.
Instead of looking like a 20th century oil refinery, they're aiming for something that looks more like a massive, modern, high-end ski lodge.
They are planning to incorporate extensive mass timber elements harvested from sustainable forestry. They will combine that organic texture with minimalist, neutral-colored precast concrete and matte metal paneling.
The idea is to specifically mimic the muted browns, tans, and grays of the surrounding desert talent. They want the buildings to look like a natural, albeit highly organized, extension of the stark rural landscape.
And beyond Gensler's design choices, the visual footprint is heavily regulated by two primary legally binding county guardrails.
The first one is arguably my favorite detail in this entire analysis. It's the height restriction. The county wanted to make sure these data center buildings couldn't be towering, multi-story monoliths that permanently dominate the horizon line. But instead of just picking an arbitrary height limit out of a hat, they tied it directly to the local fire department.
Yes. The county has legally restricted the maximum building heights to strictly align with the vertical reach of the local municipal fire department's current emergency response equipment.
Specifically, the maximum extension of the ladders on their existing fire trucks.
And here is the quirky legal hook that makes it brilliant. If the developers decide they want to build higher than those current ladders can reach, they are legally required to purchase, provide, and maintain brand new, appropriately equipped ladder trucks for the county every 10 years in perpetuity.
That is hilarious. You can build as high as you want, but you're buying us new fire engines for the rest of eternity.
Exactly. Custom industrial fire trucks are incredibly expensive, and staffing them requires specialized training. So, to avoid those massive recurring capital and operational expenditures, the developers are strongly incentivized to keep the data hall sprawling and single story.
It keeps the architecture low to the ground, which conveniently makes it easily obscured by the natural rolling terrain and the massive acoustic berms we discussed. It's an incredibly clever piece of local governance. Unsurprisingly, the developers chose to build short, wide buildings.
The second visual guardrail is dark sky compliance. Elder County is renowned for its pristine rural night sky. To preserve that and to minimize the psychological impact of industrialization on the residents, the entire 40,000-acre campus must adhere to rigorous lighting regulations.
All exterior security and operational lighting has to be heavily shielded, pointed exclusively downward, and likely restricted to warmer color temperatures like amber or red, which don't scatter in the atmosphere the way harsh blue-white LEDs do. It completely eliminates upward light pollution and nighttime sky glow.
It also serves a vital dual purpose of protecting the navigation patterns of migratory birds, which we will touch on shortly.
So to answer the initial question, will it look awful? No. It's meticulously planned, architecturally sophisticated, incredibly low to the ground, and it will remain largely dark at night.
But we have to remain realistic about the sheer scale. Due to its unfathomable size, dozens of massive rectangular warehouses, miles of security fencing, sprawling electrical substations, and endless arrays of dry coolers, it will undeniably look like exactly what it is.
A colossal, highly secure, technologically advanced computing fortress dropped into the wilderness. You can paint it brown and keep it low, but it is impossible to fully hide a $100 billion installation.
Exactly. They mitigated the noise, they saved the water, and they camouflaged the buildings. But they cannot change the fundamental laws of physics. And this brings us to the most severe, most terrifying, and completely unresolved issue facing the Stratos project.
We are transitioning now from the successfully mitigated impacts to the unavoidable thermodynamic realities. They stop the noise, they solve the water. But the first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only change forms.
Thermodynamics is the ultimate, inescapable judge here. We established that the facility consumes 9 gigawatts of continuous electrical energy. The laws of physics dictate that 100% of that electrical energy must eventually be dissipated as waste heat.
And for a facility of this unprecedented scale, the continuous thermal output is almost incomprehensible. It presents a massive, largely unregulated, and unresolved ecological liability.
Let's break down the mathematics of a hyperscale thermal load. The heat originates from two distinct, massive sources on the campus. First, you have the mechanical inefficiency of the natural gas power generation itself.
Even with the brilliant combined cycle system we discussed earlier, modern natural gas turbines are still bound by physics. They operate at roughly 60% thermal efficiency in a highly optimized setup.
Right. So, to produce a continuous 9 gigawatt electrical output, the combustion process itself is going to release roughly 13,500 megawatts of waste heat directly into the surrounding environment via massive exhaust stacks and secondary cooling fins.
And that's just the power plant. The second source is the computational load. The 9,000 megawatts of electricity that successfully makes it into the data halls is powering tens of thousands of AI servers, optical interconnects, and network switches.
And as those semiconductor components process data, every single electron they consume degrades into thermal energy due to electrical resistance within the silicon. Every electron eventually becomes heat.
And we just talked about the brilliant closed-loop air cooling system. Those dry coolers and industrial fans have to aggressively reject that entire 9,000 megawatt heat load into the outside ambient air to prevent the servers from literally melting down.
So, when you combine the power generation exhaust with the computational heat rejection, the Stratos project will continuously emit an estimated 22,500 megawatts of total thermal energy into the atmosphere, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
It is genuinely hard for the human brain to visualize 22,500 megawatts of heat. But the source report included a visceral physics comparison provided by independent physicists, which I referenced at the very beginning of this deep dive.
It is a profoundly sobering calculation.
Rejecting 22,500 megawatts of heat is thermodynamically equivalent to the heat generated by 96 football fields of dense forests burning to ash every single hour around the clock.
That is the sheer volume of thermal energy being blasted into the desert air. It isn't a localized puff of warm air, it is a geological scale thermal event.
And when you blast that much heat into the atmosphere via thousands of high-velocity industrial fans, you create a massive, localized, and permanent thermal plume. A relentless convection column of rising hot air that fundamentally alters the microclimate of the entire valley.
According to detailed physical modeling conducted by Rob Davies, a physics professor at Utah State University, the sheer volume of heat dissipation from this facility could raise daytime ambient temperatures in the immediate valley by up to 5 degrees Fahrenheit.
5 degrees during the day in an already hot desert is significant, but the nighttime modeling is where the biological threat becomes terrifying. Because the high desert naturally cools rapidly after sunset, dropping a permanent artificial heat island into the basin could spike localized nighttime temperatures by an alarming 12 degrees Fahrenheit.
And if we connect this to the broader biological picture, this is where the local community's fears are 100% justified. A 12-degree increase at night carries severe, cascading third-order ecological consequences.
I mean, how do you even begin to regulate an artificial heat island of this magnitude? Environmental laws are mostly built around tangible pollution, chemical spills, water contamination, particulate matter. We have robust laws against dumping toxic sludge. But we don't really have a robust regulatory framework for pure thermodynamic exhaust.
Yeah.
You aren't polluting the air with a chemical. You are literally just making the air fundamentally hotter.
That regulatory gap is a major concern for environmentalists because the biological impact of that specific nighttime heat is devastating to arid flora. Desert ecosystems rely heavily on the natural dew cycle.
Meaning they need the cool nights.
Exactly. They need those rapidly cooling nighttime temperatures to allow atmospheric moisture to condense on the surface so plants and insects can survive. Arid plants open their stomata at night to take in carbon dioxide when it's cool, minimizing water loss.
Oh, wow. Okay.
By raising the nighttime temperature by 12 degrees, you permanently disrupt the dew cycle and force the plants to lose moisture. You are essentially starving the local desert flora of vital surface moisture, which collapses the base of the local food web.
And the thermal impact doesn't stop at the ground level. We've got 22,500 megawatts of rising hot air. That creates persistent, massive thermal updrafts. These updrafts will fundamentally alter local wind patterns, potentially affecting cloud formation and precipitation downwind.
And remember the geography we discussed. The project site sits immediately north of the Great Salt Lake.
The lake is a globally critical sanctuary and waypoint for millions of migratory birds. It's an indispensable stopover on the Pacific Flyway.
Ornithologists and environmentalists are deeply concerned that these massive artificial thermal columns will act like an invisible, turbulent wall in the sky.
Like a wall of hot air.
Yes, the thermal updrafts could severely disrupt avian flight paths, exhaust birds as they try to navigate the turbulence, and fundamentally alter local nesting behaviors. The birds rely on predictable atmospheric conditions to cross the barren desert. You drop a permanent burning forest equivalent thermal plume directly in their path, and the ecological fallout could be catastrophic.
It is one of the project's most significant and underregulated threats.
Yeah.
And we haven't even touched on the macro-environmental issue, the carbon footprint.
While burning natural gas is significantly cleaner than combusting coal, it produces fewer particulates and sulfur dioxide. The sheer volume of gas required to sustain a continuous 9-gigawatt load will still produce an immense, undeniable quantity of greenhouse gases.
The preliminary environmental analyses suggest that at full build-out, the Stratos project could increase the state of Utah's overall planet-heating carbon pollution by an astonishing 50%.
One single facility increasing an entire state's carbon footprint by half. The developers have naturally attempted to mitigate public panic by describing the architecture as carbon capture enabled.
They point to Gensler's plans for their parallel project in Canada, which theoretically aims to capture and sequester a large percentage of the carbon emissions on site.
But the source document is very clear on this point. The feasibility of deploying point source carbon capture and sequestration, or CCS, at a 9-gigawatt scale in the specific geological conditions of Box Elder County remains highly speculative.
What makes it speculative?
Well, CCS usually involves complex chemical processes like amine scrubbing, which themselves require massive amounts of energy and water. It is technically unproven at this magnitude.
So regardless of future theoretical technology, the baseline emissions profile of this fossil fuel plant represents a profound and irreversible alteration to the state's carbon ledger.
These terrifying unresolved macro-environmental issues, the 12-degree nighttime warming, the disrupted desert dew cycle, the altered wind patterns threatening migratory birds, the 50% spike in state carbon emissions, these are exactly the factors that ignited a political firestorm on the ground.
Which brings us to the deeply human element of this deep dive. We've talked about the engineering marvels and the thermodynamic threats. Now we need to look at the socio-political friction versus the economic windfall, because this is where the local residents essentially went to war with the developers and the state government.
The primary grievance among the local populace is the perception of a completely subverted democratic process. The massive scale and the opacity of the approval process triggered a fierce, highly organized grassroots backlash.
And this all traces back to a highly specific legal mechanism called the MITA bypass.
MITA stands for the Military Installation Development Authority. It is crucial to understand the history here. To build something this massive, a developer usually has to go through traditional county-level zoning approvals, planning commission reviews, environmental impact studies, and endless municipal town halls.
Which are notoriously slow. They can take years to greenlight massive industrial developments. Developers generally hate traditional zoning because it gives local residents a voice, and local residents concerned about traffic, noise, and property values often say no.
So the Stratos developers bypassed this friction entirely. The project area encompasses significant tracts of privately assembled land, but it also sits strategically right next to 1,200 acres of state-owned and military property near the Utah Test and Training Range and Hill Air Force Base.
By strategically integrating those 1,200 acres of military-adjacent lands into the broader project scope, the developers successfully triggered a legal loophole. They transferred primary land use jurisdiction away from Box Elder County and directly to MENA.
MENA operates as a unique, powerful state-level entity created by the Utah legislature. It possesses exclusive police and zoning powers over its designated areas. It effectively functions as an independent, state-run municipality dedicated specifically to advancing military-adjacent economic development.
So by partnering with MITA, the Wonder Valley development became legally exempt from traditional Box Elder County land use ordinances. They completely bypassed the County Land Use Development and Management Act.
While Kevin O'Leary heavily praises this mechanism as a distinct competitive advantage for Utah because it radically accelerates permitting timelines from years to months, it generated profound friction with local residents.
Oh, I'm sure.
They felt utterly disenfranchised. They felt their right to conventional local democratic oversight over their own backyards had been stolen by a state-level bureaucracy.
And it wasn't just a vague feeling of exclusion. The transparency deficit was documented. County Commissioner Lee Perry publicly admitted that the entire process was deeply rushed. He noted that state-level officials and the developers were quietly negotiating with private landowners long before the local county commission was even formally briefed on the full scope of the massive project.
The residents felt completely ambushed, and that frustration boiled over at a highly contentious special county commission meeting held on May 4th, 2026.
This meeting is the stuff of local legend now. Over 1,100 furious residents showed up. They had already submitted more than 2,500 written public comments against the project. And the crowd was so angry, so disruptive and rowdy, that the three county commissioners were forced to abruptly leave the stage.
The situation deteriorated so rapidly that they literally had to go into hiding.
Yep.
They finalized their unanimous approval vote virtually from a secure, undisclosed location.
That is intense.
It was. The animosity was so severe that following the vote, the three commissioners were placed under formal police protection due to a barrage of direct threats.
This is what the source refers to as democratic trauma. When you strip away a community's ability to participate in the zoning of their own neighborhoods, the reaction is explosive. It is a fundamental breach of the social contract.
And that explosion of anger formalized into highly organized civic action groups. The most prominent is the Box Elder Accountability Referendum, or BEAR. They operate alongside a broader statewide coalition named Utah Residents, organized for oversight, transparency, and stewardship, or Utah Roots.
What's fascinating about these groups is the political composition. It is a rare, highly effective bipartisan alliance. You have progressive environmentalists who are absolutely terrified of the thermodynamic impact on the Great Salt Lake and the local microclimate.
Right.
And standing right shoulder to shoulder with them, you have staunch rural conservatives who are absolutely furious about state-level government overreach and the circumvention of local property zoning rights.
BEAR has initiated a formal legal process to launch a ballot referendum. If they secure 5,000 verified signatures, they can place the county's interlocal agreement with Meta directly onto the November ballot. The voters could potentially void the county's consent to the project.
But the legal caveat here is dripping with tragic irony. If the locals successfully void the county agreement because the land is technically under MITA's exclusive jurisdiction, they might not actually kill the project. They might just make it worse for themselves.
That is the severe risk. County attorneys note that severing the interlocal agreement might accidentally kill the very guardrails the community fought so hard for. Voiding the contract could legally erase the 55 decibel noise limits, the strict fire truck height restrictions, the dark sky compliance, and the strict water protections prohibiting draws from the Great Salt Lake.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it would ironically leave the massive project entirely in the hands of state-level military regulators with absolutely zero local oversight or negotiated protections.
It's a massive, high-stakes gamble for the residents. And while this local grassroots fight is happening on the ground in Utah, the rhetoric surrounding the project has escalated into a full-blown national information war.
Kevin O'Leary has aggressively defended the project on national television, continually leaning heavily on that geopolitical framing we discussed earlier. He frames the local resistance not as concerned citizens, but as an active threat to national security.
In a highly controversial Fox News interview, O'Leary claimed that the intense local opposition is heavily influenced by coordinated, malicious misinformation campaigns. He literally suggested that local organizers are acting as proxies for the Chinese government, attempting to deliberately cripple the expansion of United States compute capacity.
He escalated it further by specifically calling out opposition leaders by their first and last names on national television, naming organizers from the Alliance for a Better Utah and Elevate Utah. He challenged them to come out wherever you are and demanded to audit your books to prove they are not foreign actors or paid agitators.
He also claimed on his social media platforms that 90% of the protesters at those Rockies County meetings were paid professional protesters bussed in from out of state, and that AI-generated bots were driving the negative online commentary.
Local organizers furiously denied these allegations. They fired back publicly, stating that the only foreign actor here is the Canadian billionaire pretending he cares about Utah more than the people who actually live here. They demanded that O'Leary take his data center back to his cartoon villain lair.
And leaders from Utah Roots emphasized that the opposition is entirely grassroots, composed of actual county residents from across the political spectrum who are legitimately terrified of the project's ecological and democratic consequences.
This intensely hostile rhetoric perfectly illustrates the unbridgeable disconnect here. On one side, you have the macroscopic, national security-focused priorities of the billionaire developers who view the landscape as an empty chessboard. On the other side, you have the microscopic, deeply personal environmental and democratic anxieties of the rural populace whose actual backyards will host the infrastructure.
But we have to look impartially at the other side of the ledger. The developers aren't just bringing high-level national security rhetoric, they are bringing a massive, undeniable economic package. The economic windfall promised to the county is a masterclass in community investment and financial pacification.
It is undeniably transformative for a rural county. To mitigate the immediate socioeconomic impacts of construction, the developers negotiated that binding interlocal agreement. It requires significant upfront financial commitments that address immediate local concerns.
For instance, the developer is contractually obligated to fund all public infrastructure required for the project area. That means Box Elder County taxpayers bear absolutely zero direct financial burden for the construction of new roads, new sewer systems, or municipal water connections required by the massive influx of workers.
Furthermore, they provided an upfront cash payment of $16.2 million earmarked specifically to equip local law enforcement, emergency medical services, and fire departments well before the anticipated influx of temporary construction workers arrives. They are pre-funding the strain on local services.
And the long-term projections are staggering for a county of this size. The facility will create 2,000 permanent, highly skilled technical jobs. It will generate an estimated $108 million in annual county revenue at full build-out, plus $250 million annually in state sales tax receipts. That is generational wealth for the local government.
They even structured leaseback agreements. This allows local ranchers to continue farming and grazing livestock on the vast tracts of undeveloped open space buffer lands within the 40,000-acre project area, preserving some semblance of the agricultural heritage.
So what does this all mean for the human element? The locals are getting billions in investment, they are getting zero tax burdens for the new infrastructure, their first responders are fully funded with upfront cash, and they get to keep ranching on the buffer lands. Yet they are still furious. And
Yes.
they are furious because, despite the immense financial windfall, they feel their fundamental American right to self-determination was stripped away by a state-level bureaucratic maneuver.
This raises an important question, however, regarding the finality of this process. The battle isn't entirely over. The source report is clear that state-level regulatory oversight is still pending, and this is where the physics and the politics collide again.
The MITA bypass got them past the County Zoning Commission, but they still have to run a gauntlet of state-level environmental and engineering reviews.
The Division of Air Quality, or DAQ, must issue a formal approval order. The developers have to definitively prove through extensive atmospheric modeling that their massive gas turbines will not violate national ambient air quality standards. This process includes a mandatory 30-day public comment period.
Which will inevitably serve as the next major battleground for the environmental opposition groups. They will use that 30-day window to hammer the thermodynamic and carbon emission data we discussed earlier.
Additionally, the Division of Drinking Water mandates a strict separation of systems to ensure the industrial cooling water never touches the potable human water supply.
Important detail.
And the Division of Water Quality must heavily regulate the discharge of that desalinated water back into the Great Salt Lake watershed, ensuring it doesn't contain concentrated heavy metals, anti-corrosive glycol, or thermal pollution that could harm the ecosystem.
So, to bring all these complex threads together, we are looking at an unprecedented engineering marvel. A $100 billion 9-gigawatt natural gas-powered shadow grid designed to win a global AI arms race.
Exactly.
We have brilliant technological mitigations, closed-loop air cooling that uses degraded saline groundwater to achieve a net positive hydrological impact on a fragile basin. We have massive 55 decibel acoustic barriers, owl wing fan blades, and dark sky compliance, ensuring the facility remains low, quiet, and dark.
But those brilliant mitigations are fundamentally counterbalanced by severe, inescapable thermodynamic realities. 22,500 megawatts of continuous thermal exhaust permanently altering the microclimate, threatening the fragile desert dew cycle, disrupting migratory bird patterns, and massively expanding the state's carbon footprint.
And wrapping all of this engineering is a volatile socio-political wrapper. A rural community experiencing profound democratic trauma as state and military authorities bypass their local governance, all justified by the billionaire developers as a necessary sacrifice to win the future.
The Stratos project is the ultimate strategic trade-off of the modern era. It proves that modern technology can engineer away the acute, localized threats of water drain and deafening noise, making a mega facility surprisingly gentle on local municipal infrastructure.
However, the ultimate cost of maintaining U.S. technological supremacy in the AI race is the permanent industrialization of the high desert. We are trading democratic zoning control, open skies, and natural microclimates for the relentless 9-gigawatt hum of the future economy.
It is a monumental, irreversible pivot in the evolution of human digital infrastructure.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought. We just spent this entire deep dive dissecting the unbelievable friction, the massive global supply chain restructuring, the extreme acoustic engineering, the thermodynamic threats, and the bypass democracy required to build just one sovereign megacampus.
One campus.
But the global AI race isn't won with one facility. If it takes this much political capital, this much water engineering, and this much thermodynamic exhaust to build the Wonder Valley campus in Utah, what happens when the United States attempts to build the second, the third, or the 10th facility needed to truly maintain global dominance? Are we structurally, environmentally, and democratically prepared for the sheer physical cost of our digital world?
The diagnostic landscape of our future is vastly complex, and it is going to require us to reckon with costs we haven't even begun to fully calculate.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the sources. We will see you next time.